Well, this is December 20th, 2020, and we are interviewing Dave Hollis at the Remax Peak office. And this is me, Oliver,
Brady,
Michael,
Alex.
I'm the man of the hour.
yeah.
I'll get Travis in here. He can. Alright, but I'd pretty much like to start off with saying thank you for coming here. We're pretty interested in getting a chance to interview you, and I think it should be good for all of us pretty much. And then one of my first questions I wanted to know was did you get drafted, or did you enlist, and what kind of years were you involved in the war?
I'm going to take this off.
Yeah.
Long ways away. I went to Centerburg High School. I graduated in 1963, and then I went to Ohio State. And while I was at Ohio State, I got involved in ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. So I did that for 4 years, and then went to summer camp after that summer. Got my commission then, and then I spent 2 years in graduate school getting my master's degree. Then I went into the service. So I went into the service in November of 1969. And I spent almost 2 years, because I spent 1 year in the States, at Fort Lee, Virginia, going through petroleum school and things like that. And then I got sent to Vietnam. And I would normally have come home in November of 71, but because things were winding down in Vietnam, I got an early out, so I came home in September.
Wow. But I want to ask too, is that what were you doing for a living? I want to ask too, is that what kind of stuff were you doing for a living at the time? We talked about too in our class about how in the 1971 time stuff was moving down, and that in 73 Nixon pretty much moved to end the war itself.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good that you gotta get home early. But what were you doing for a living at the time, or did you just have your plans set on being an officer and going in there?
No, well, I grew up on a small farm in Mount Liberty, and I was in FFA, and so I made money with livestock, beef, cattle, and hogs, and what I made there, I paid for part of my college education. Then when I was in my master's program, I got an assistantship, which gave me, by then I was married, my wife was a teacher, and with our assistantship, we got by okay. Then after I got out of the service, I went to work for the federal government in Washington, D.C.
Oh, after you got out of the service, you went back in?
Yeah.
Wow. And then, so you said that you had you were in an ROTC program for 4 years.
4 years.
I wanted to ask too, is that what about the training experience you think was the most memorable? Do you have anything that stood out during this time?
Well, probably the most memorable was the things I learned, while I was in the service, and not in the classroom so much as trying to get along with the guys that I was involved with, because I was a platoon leader, and then I was a company commander at Fort Lee, Virginia for a while. Then I went overseas, and I had what they called a petroleum platoon. It was about 30 guys, 30 or 35, something like that. I can't remember exactly how many there were. But we ran this petroleum tank farm that had either 5 or 6 huge tanks. Most of them were 20,000 gallons. Some were 10,000 gallons. And we got the fuel brought into us by either trucks or on a pipeline. And then, it was distributed out to other units, and also from just like a gas station. The guys would come in and fill their vehicles out, because we ran that. And we had a laboratory where we ran chemical analysis to make sure the fuel was okay. I brought something along to show you. vehicle will travel. You guys are too young to remember the TV show Have Gun Will Travel, or maybe you've heard of it, I don't know. Anyway, my Jeep was Have Fuel Will Travel. My other vehicle was what we called a gun truck. It was a 5-ton vehicle, a truck, you know, tandem wheels and the whole thing. And I mean, a lot of people did this. We just did, you know, went off the same idea. We lined the 4 sides of the bed with armor plating, as well as the doors and everything. And then we mounted machine guns on there. And the purpose of that was basically to patrol our jet fuel pipeline that they pumped fuel up to us. And because the Seabees had put that pipeline in, and it really wasn't buried. They just ran it along the ground mostly. And so we would go out every day and patrol that, make sure there were no leaks, and if there were, we'd get them fixed and everything. And the pipeline was about this big around, so it was a pretty big deal. When they got into it, it would make a mess because there'd be just hundreds and thousands of gallons coming out of it.
So
And the fire, that jet fuel, a lot of people the Vietnamese, they would try and get in to get the fuel to use for fires and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times then it would blow up and it would destroy a whole community.
wow.
Yeah, that was a mess.
So your job was like pretty much making sure that pipe was like good to go and like refueling some of these
And
things.
managing these 30 or so people, that ran the whole operation. Yeah.
And then when you were doing that, like what area were you in, like in Vietnam? Do you like remember?
Okay, I was in, if you're familiar with Vietnam, there's Saigon that's down fairly south. Then there's Da Nang, which is higher up.
Yep.
Now, I flew into Da Nang, and then I spent a little bit of time in Phu Bai, which is north, and then I got stationed at Quan Tri, and Quan Tri Combat Base, and then we had 2 people up at a little refueling station in Dong Ha. That was 5 miles from the DMZ.
Oh, jeez.
So I could sit, yeah. So I could lie on my bed at night and hear the bombers dropping their loads up there. You could just, it wasn't real loud, but you could sit there and listen to them and shake a little bit.
That just seems so insane. Oh my gosh. And like, sheesh. And then like, when you first got there, like in Da Nang, do you remember what it was like there?
Well, yeah, when you first get in there, having never been there before in a war zone, it was kind of like you were afraid to get off the plane. You didn't know what it was going to be like. But once you were there, you say, well, okay, it's a big base, Da Nang is, so there wasn't any real problem there. But then as I got up to Phu Bai and then got to Quan Tri, it gets a little stickier. Although I wasn't in a combat unit, I was in what they call a supply and service company. So we had my petroleum unit was 1 platoon, then we had an outfit that took care of, they had a motor pool, they had the place where the rations all came in and went out to the mess halls and everything. So we had a transportation company that hauled the fuel in and out of my facility. So.
Yeah, that's just like, even though you were like just on like the supply side compared to people who weren't in combat, that seems like you were putting in, that's like just as much craziness.
Well, yeah, I mean, we got rocket attacks, and we had people shooting guns at us. Some, not much, but I remember one night we started hearing machine gun fire, rifle fire, and so I sent my gun truck out at the entrance to the base, and when they got there, they started getting some incoming, and then they finally figured out real quick that there was a pagoda over here, and and part of the rounds, they were hitting that pagoda and ricocheting off. And so my guys immediately got the hell out of there. And we let that go on without us.
Oh my gosh. And like, so you were seeing like quite a bit of combat too, just when you were in the, what was the name of the northern place you were in 5 miles from the DMZ?
Oh, Dong Ha?
Dong. So like you could just see the combat going on from.
Well, yeah, I was never in combat, but they blew up our ammo dump.
Oh, that's.
Stored all the stuff. They got in there one night and set off a bunch of, that. And of course, part of what was in there was the stuff that you can't breathe in, tear gas like.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and that started covering the whole base. So we're walking around with our gas masks on, trying to figure out what's going on. But it was interesting because of the people you dealt with over there, and most of them were, I had some sergeants and so on that were pretty enlisted guys that were, men, but most of them had been drafted, and some of them came from mysterious backgrounds. I had one guy, he was a buck sergeant, and he got in a scuffle with a guy at a bar one night and ended up meeting him outside the bar, and he had along a tire iron with him.
Oh boy.
And he got convicted of that, and the judge told him, they were in Georgia, the judge told him you can either do 5 years in the pen or 2 years in the Army. Which do you want? He said, I'll take the Army. But he was one of the best guys I had, one of the best enlisted men I had.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, he was good. You could count on him, and he cleaned up his act. And another guy was the getaway driver for a bank robbery. And he was a good guy too, because he was one of my company clerks and did a lot of the paperwork and everything. And so he was a good guy too. He'd just gotten in trouble.
That reminds me. So we were watching a Vietnam documentary in our class, and one of the things they mentioned that although there's still just off of segregation and stuff going on, and they said when they got to the battlefield though, it didn't matter who you were. That kind of reminds me of that sort of situation. Although every one of you guys is different. Although some of you guys may have had rockier past or even been straight up criminals, that you guys were there for business pretty much.
Oh yeah. And we had an operation going on that got run. They congregated people into our base, and from there they went into Laos for an operation, which was kind of hush-hush, but I mean, it sure was news to us. I mean, there was a lot going on, because we went from having, a few helicopters in the unit here to having fields full of them and everything. And the point I want to make is, during that time, we were running a really fast operation. I mean, a lot of things were getting done, and the guys were working very hard, 7 days a week, But I had fewer problems with them then than at any other time I was there, because they were busy. They felt that they were doing something that had a meaning to it, rather than just screwing around. And of course, when that operation was over, then things kind of went back to normal, and they got back to doing their dirty tricks.
And then, do you guys have anything to add to about what we've heard so far?
I got a question.
Travis wants to say something.
First off, can you just move the phone a little closer to him? He's pretty quiet on my phone.
He's right there, Travis.
And so my question is, you said there was kind of a hush-hush thing, people going to Laos. Was there a lot of those kind of hush-hush things going on?
Well, yeah. I mean, there weren't so many that I got involved in. There was just that one operation that we were, involved in. but they were doing things like that all over the country. You know, a lot of things were hush-hush.
And like we talked to about how a limiting factor in the war was that like we weren't allowed to go into Laos or Cambodia.
Yeah, there was some of that.
Do you feel like there'd be a difference if we just went in there instead of trying to like deal with just by staying only in Vietnam while they were going all around there?
Well, in my opinion, the basic problem we had in Vietnam in the war was that we didn't have clear direction on what we were going to do. It wasn't like World War II, where they said, "Okay, we're coming, and we're gonna launch everything at you, and really go all out and win this thing." We never had that much direction, and that's why the guys got a little lackadaisical, because they were basically saying, "Well, okay, 360 more days and I'm out of here, and it doesn't matter what I do," you know. And we had problems just like you have in stateside. I had a guy who was on drugs of some sort. I'm not sure. Sure, marijuana, maybe even more. And I finally sat him down and talked to him, and I said, "You know, I'm going to get you out of here." Well, the next day, the word had gone around in my unit among the guys, and the hat was passed, and there was a price on his head. And he heard about it and went into the CO's office and said, "Look, I want out. I want out right now." And then so we shipped him out, got rid of him.
And like you mentioned too, is that like about how we were kind of like with you pretty much were describing like we're almost like one hand tied behind our back fighting.
Yeah.
Do you think your opinion like on the war like changed during your time in service, or do you think you like felt the same about it throughout?
Oh, I think the same, yeah. I mean, it started off, we were supposed to be advisors, and so we were over there kind of advising people, and then, of course, everybody kept ramping it up, and we had more and more people, but we still didn't have a real clear direction and a you know, as to what we were supposed to be doing. We thought, philosophically, well, we're supposed to be fighting communism and everything, but, you know, you had one hand behind your back the whole time you were doing it.
Yeah, that just makes that sort of combination does not make anything good.
No.
And then, do you guys have anything to add on that too?
Yeah, how did you feel about the protests that were going on in America? What was your opinion on them while you were in the war?
Well, of course, you didn't hear much about them. And it really wasn't, by the time I went in, things were starting to, you know, there were protests, but it was really while I was over there and after I came home that they really got going. I can't remember, when did Kent State occur?
I think it was May 5th, 1970. That was what I
Okay,
remember.
yeah, okay. Yeah, but it didn't really, you know, I just wasn't that aware of it really. I knew they were going on, but it never, you know, I didn't pay that much attention to it really.
Yeah, I feel like I have to ask this though, is that, how do you feel about the hippie movement sort of thing that was going on?
Well, when I got home, I got, you know, the wide angle pants and everything, so I kind of got on the tail end of that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Bell bottoms.
Bell bottoms.
Bell bottoms.
Bell bottoms. Been so long.
Do you see any similarities between the protests back then, like during Vietnam, and the protests now?
Oh, yeah, that's hard to say. Yeah, probably there is, but it's for different reasons, I guess. You know, they were protesting the war back then. They didn't think we should be over in the war and everything. And I think what they're doing right now is, I'm not sure they know what they're protesting about. And, you know, the whole defund the police thing, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think we're starting to see the results of that, because places like Portland and Spokane and so on, now they've got people saying, hey, we want law and order here, nobody's coming. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I'm pretty sure about all of us agree with that, about how defund the police just doesn't make any sense. But some of the stuff.
I got a question for him too.
Oh, alright. Get yours.
So bringing it kind of into the political spectrum back into like the Vietnam era, do you think if they would have actually declared a state of war, you would have been able to get more work done over there?
I think so. Because that would have given us clear direction. I mean, at that point then, Westmoreland or whoever was in charge would have a clear direction to say, okay, everybody, pack them on and let's go. Of course, it was a difficult war. It wasn't like the Second World War where one side was lined up here and the other side was lined up here, and they shot at each other because you were scrambling around in rice paddies, and the terrain over there is really pretty hostile in some places. I mean, it's just jungle and swamps and rice paddies and everything. And so it'd be tough, but we could have gone after it and cleaned it up if somebody would have given us the right direction to go.
And something that I want to ask too is that you mentioned like the protests and stuff during that time period, and part of that too we talked about in one of the documentaries we watched as a class is that the press may have like overextended their reach in there, and that they were trying to play too much of a role in to try and get this stuff riled up. Do you feel like the press overextended their reach there?
I'd say probably did, like they usually do. The same could be said here.
Oh,
I mean,
100%.
if they get their political agenda and they start reporting things the way they think they should be, then you're not sure if you're getting the truth or if you're just getting what they think's the truth. I mean, I can remember when your granddad and I were in school one year together, and I can remember it wasn't a Vietnam related thing. It was I know what happened. One of the co-eds, female student, was caught jaywalking across High Street, and the cops, wrote her up for that, ticketed her and everything. So we had a big protest at 4 o'clock that afternoon. They closed down High Street, and back then the buses that ran out along the streets, had electrical connections that went up, and the guys got up and pulled those down, so they were just stuck. You couldn't turn the motor back on. I mean, that was funny.
And then something too is that I was want to ask this especially is that during this time, like you said, you spent your time you were like trying to make sure the pipeline's all good and pretty much dealing with rations and stuff. But did you have to work with like any South Vietnamese like counterparts for your stuff, or was it pretty much just American where you were at?
Some. There was one. He was a first lieutenant, Vietnamese first lieutenant, the same as I was the first lieutenant by then. And I had done some, I forget now what I did for him, but I really helped him out on something. And so the next day he showed up with a bottle of cognac and little Vietnamese rank things for first lieutenant. So I wore mine on my boonie hat up here, and I put those back here on the back. So whichever direction I was going, they'd know what rank I was.
And then when you did work with some of the South Vietnamese people, did you feel like they were just as like hardworking as like the Americans, or do you feel like they had almost different motives than we did?
No, I think they had probably a better idea of what they were doing over there than what we were, because we weren't given a real clear direction. But they kind of knew what they were doing. And the part of Quang Tri province where our combat base was it's like the Appalachia of the U.S. It's pretty, you know, things aren't all that good, but we had, we needed to get some sandbags piled up around our, what we call a hooch, the building where we would live. And we had hired 2 or 3 people to do that, and they were very industrious. They were hard working. Of course, we were paying them, and you know, they were getting something out of it. But there were also we had a deal one day. The other vehicle I had was an M49. It's basically a gas truck. It's not as big as some of the ones you see here, but it's like a 1,200 gallon gas truck, and the guy would go around and he'd fill up all the fuel tanks for different, you know, buildings and everything. And there was an accident, and they said that he had killed this man on a motorcycle. Well, we never did believe that the guy was killed, but I had to go, and a couple of my people, we went over and we found out where his family lived, and we sat down with them, and we had tea and offered our condolences and everything. But there were a lot of things like that if we're trying to figure out if there was some way they could get money from you or steal something from you, you know.
And like thinking of that, did you get a chance to spend time in Saigon?
No.
Like from our stuff is that we were saying a thing about Saigon too, and like the current climate about that, and it seemed like some of the stuff like we were doing, we tried like towards the end of the war, we tried so much to like give them almost like everything, and then try and while we phase out our troops.
Yeah.
And they said like pretty much the Saigon government there was. Do you feel like the government there, like we heard from what our like documentaries about how corrupt it was and how they're mismanaging everything. Do you feel like that trickled down to?
Yeah, I think that's probably that's a good way to describe it. I think there was a lot of corruption and you know, things going on. There was a lot of, one of the last things I did over there was I had to close down my tank farm. So we actually used up all the fuel. We pumped water into the tanks, not completely full, but and then we set up what they called a bag farm, which was a temporary facility with 10,000 gallon big rubber tubes, and that's what we used to store the fuel, and ran a little gas station out of it so we could fill vehicles. And I got that basically completed just in time to get out of there, leave.
Yeah. And then, do you feel like when you were in Vietnam, do you feel like when you got out, you like got something from it? Do you feel like that, or do you feel like it was almost like bad for you to be there?
It was it wasn't a good experience. It was a meaningful experience. You know, trying to watch over 30 guys and make sure they're doing something that's productive, you know, and dealing with the discipline problems and, you know, everything. We had one guy, we called him Chief. He was, I think, Navajo Indian. He got drunk one night and came around and was going to kill me. Well, I got him down on the ground and we put him in the brig and we got him out of there. Get him discharged and gone.
Wow.
So, I mean, there were a lot of things like that. You learn to deal with stressful problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've carried that with me the rest of my career, really.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other, yeah.
Or did that happen a lot? Like people trying to kill their commanders? Because we just learned about like fragging and other things where people would get like really mad at their officers or their people that were in charge of them.
There was some out that went on. That one guy I was telling you about, the guy who was an addict. And I told him I wanted to get rid of him. Well, what actually happened, I think he threw a grenade at our hooch, you know, where we lived, but it didn't hit us, you know, but it was there, and that's what caused the guys to pass the hat and put a price on his head. So there was some of that went on, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the media blew up the portrayal of the drugs, alcohol problem that was so not very common in Vietnam?
Now, let me make sure I understand.
So we, in the documentary we watched, we learned about the media, blowing things out of proportion, and we also learned that the drug and alcohol problem in Vietnam was not as common as it was made to be, as it was made to be displayed. So was that really a major issue, like it was displayed, or
Of the drug problem?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I've never smoked marijuana or taken anything like that, but that's where I learned how to smell it. and there was some of that going on. Yeah.
Do you think it was was it a huge problem there, or do you think it just
I wouldn't say it was a huge problem, but it was a bit of a problem. Yeah. I mean, not everybody was on dope and weren't potheads and all that, but quite a few people did smoke pot.
And then to go back to what we were saying about your when you mentioned that right as you finished that oil place, storing all that oil to pretty much use as a gas station, you got that was about time for you to end up going home. What was the transition like to get home? Do you feel do you have any bad experiences with that, or?
Oh, with coming home?
Mm-hmm.
No, I was pretty lucky. I don't know why it is, but I never had anybody come up and spit on me or call me a baby killer or any of that thing. Part of it is, I think, I came from Centerburg and we originally came back to Centerburg and got reconnected with all the people that I knew, and started having euchre parties on Friday nights. So, no, I would. The only thing my wife would probably say the worst part about it was after I'd gotten home, a few days after I'd gotten home, in the middle of the night, she felt me squeezing her throat and kind of
Wow.
which she didn't appreciate. I mean, it was just one of those things carried over. Of course. One of the problems was, there's a 12-hour difference between Eastern time and Vietnamese. So when you come home, it takes you a while to get caught up on that, time difference. So
Felt like trying to sleep during the day almost.
right.
Oh my! And then so your experience getting home was better than you feel like most other people went through?
There were a lot of people that had worse experiences than I did. Because like I said, I never was confronted by anybody, calling me a baby killer or anything like that. They just didn't. Of course, when I came home, also the other thing is, when I came home, I came in close to Richmond, Virginia. That's where Fort Lee, where I was stationed for a while. My wife had lived there while I was over in Vietnam. And of course, being a military community, you're not going to get people coming up and spitting on you. So it was an easy transition that way.
That's good. Anything else?
I kind of have something to go along with that. So I was just wondering, you came back, was there a period of time where you didn't want to talk about the things that you saw over there, or were you pretty open about it the whole time?
No, I'd say I was pretty open about it. I mean, like I said, I wasn't in a combat unit, so I wasn't firing my gun every day and being shot at and everything like that. So it was a fairly normal life. I mean, we worked 7 days a week, or at least 6.5. So there, I didn't have a lot of things that got caught up in my mind and that I was trying to get over traumatized about.
When you went into the war, did you so pretty much there's some people in Centerburg that we know that served in Vietnam, a girl in our grade, Amani Marshall, her grandpa was in the war too. We talked to Skylar Briscoe, our history teacher, his dad served in the war, and when you were there, was it pretty much all of you guys were from completely different parts of the United States, or did you know people who were in there too?
No, the only people that I knew over there that I had known stateside were a couple of people out of my unit at Fort Lee that got shipped over a little ahead of me, and so I ran into them. Other than that, I mean, people were just from everywhere. You name it, they're from there. They're all scattered around.
So whenever we talk about Vietnam, or people talk about Vietnam, or the media displays it, it's always the negative, we did this wrong, and this bad stuff happened. What do you think we did right in Vietnam?
What did I do right?
No, the U.S. Itself
the
did
US?
right, or you saw that was good that.
Well, I think we didn't have clear direction, on what we were supposed to be doing. I think people's hearts were in the right place. They were trying to help out, this country of Vietnam that was facing communistic rule and so on. So I think they were right from that standpoint. They wanted to be helpful, and it was just like some of the other countries around the world that we've always helped out, and that's what makes it difficult when you know that people, in the beginning, people's hearts were in the right place. They were trying to help somebody out, and then because the government didn't get their act straight and kept escalating the thing, so that you saw more and more bodies coming home. That's what made it tough to deal with.
Yeah.
One of the I forget now what. Anyway, if someone's killed in a war, in Vietnam in this case, while I was at Fort Lee, I was assigned to go and be the officer that was with them. There'd be an officer and an enlisted man that would be there while their viewing was going on and the funeral thing and so on like that. And so I went did that one time, and that was a learning experience. That's something you only want to do once, and I did.
Yeah. So you think that the soldiers and everybody they were doing stuff right from the start, but the reason that Vietnam got out of hand was the people who were controlling the war, the government and other higher ups.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Now, we talk about the people pretty much who spent most of their time almost running the more Westmoreland, who after him Abrams there, and Lyndon B. Johnson and Nixon. Do you think that a specific president pretty much almost set it up to be wrong? Do you think is there anything Lyndon B. Johnson did that you think is where it started going wrong, or do you think one of the presidents went wrong when they got involved?
Well, yeah, probably Johnson's the one that probably takes the most heat for it, because he was the one that escalated, kept getting more and more troops over there and drafting more and more people and everything. And then, of course, when Nixon came in, he said, I want to get us out of here. It's a little bit like what we're in right now, where Trump came in and said, I want to get us out of some of these wars. And I think Nixon was trying to do the right thing, because I think he recognized that this given what we've gotten ourselves into, it just wasn't working out right. And might as well cut our losses and leave.
Yeah. Do you think that if the Nixon wasn't, do you think the war would have gotten worse if Nixon wasn't elected in 1968? Or do you think that people realized that like it's time to pack up?
Well, I think there was a lot of sentiment that it's time to get out, and Nixon happened to be the vehicle that started making that happen. Yeah, and of course when I got out of the service and I hired in this job in Washington D.C., I'd spend every morning reading the front page of the Washington Post, which was talking all about Nixon's all the problems he had and the Watergate and this and that and the other. So it was just, it was front page news. I don't know that it was probably front page news around the rest of the country, but it sure was in Washington. And I went to Richard Nixon's, my wife and I went to his inauguration.
Wow. That's crazy to like think that like about living through something like that. Where you have 1968, Martin Luther King's assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy's assassinated, and then 5 years later you have, 6 years later you have Nixon resigning.
Yeah.
You have Watergate. You had the whole Watergate thing. It's just unreal to me.
Yeah, it was, especially if you're in D.C. and you're reading about it every day in the paper and everything. I still like that movie. It was Robert Redford and it was built around the whole Nixon thing and the Washington Post. They were the reporters that were digging into it.
I think I know what movie you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then, so when you were at home and you like got to watch like the pretty much news coverage of Vietnam after you'd already left, what do you think it was accurate compared to what you were seeing when you were in it?
I would say it was probably pretty accurate, although there were some political overtones that were probably making it sound every bit as bad or worse than what it was. Because there was a sentiment that, going back to why we got in there, we were trying to do the right thing, and then the media kind of picked it up and started turning it around on us. But, it was no fun. I remember driving by, we had a road that went right straight through our base, and the airfield was off here to the side, and I was driving along there one day with my driver, and we saw a truck just piled high with bodies.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's not a good thing to see.
Sickening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dude, I don't know how you did it, to be honest. Like I don't think I could ever see myself in a situation like that.
Well, that's a good question. I guess the reason, there were a lot of us that were in the ROTC program. We have fraternity brothers of mine. A lot of us were, and the basic reason was we thought, well, we either go that way, and we're an officer and we get paid a little more and whatever, or we get drafted and we don't know what we're going to be doing. If you got drafted, you're probably going to end up in an infantry unit shooting at everybody. I was in the quartermaster unit where we weren't shooting with everybody. So, that part of it came out in the direction that I wanted it to.
After that, do you feel like you had any crazy stories about Vietnam, like anything else that was like remarkable?
Oh.
I'm ready for this.
No, I've hit on most of them. One good thing was I got to go on R&R to Hawaii and see my wife. So that was my chance to go to Hawaii. That was enjoyable. There were a few days of my tour that were very enjoyable. The rest of them were kind of, yeah.
I can't imagine Vietnam being high living.
No, it's not high living. Well, matter of fact, we had what had to be one of the worst mess halls in the world. I'm not talking about just Vietnam. I'm talking about the world. It was, it was terrible. A lot of days we kept crates of C rations in our hooch, so that if we looked at the chow line and didn't like what we saw, we'd just go get a box of C rations and eat them. It was better than, and when I went over to Vietnam, I probably weighed about 175 or 80. When I came home, I weighed 165. Luckily, my mother-in-law is a very good cook, so it didn't take me long to get back up where I was.
More importantly, though, did they serve you turkey on Thanksgiving?
Oh yeah.
We were watching part of the documentary, and they said no matter what, you would always get turkey on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. We had a good meal on Thanksgiving, because that was soon after I got over there, and I really wasn't doing anything except waiting to be told where to go and what to do and all that. But yeah, Thanksgiving meal was nice. So was Christmas. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you guys got anything else to ask?
Actually, yeah. So some people who got drafted, went to Canada or left the country. What was your opinion on them?
Take the mask off.
Yeah. What was your opinion on people who left the country when they were drafted?
Oh. I don't have much of a feeling about it. I figure, okay, they did what they thought was right at the time, and I did what I thought was right at the time. And there are a lot of people, and probably have, real bad feelings about draft dodgers and so on, but I just kind of take it philosophically and don't worry about it very much.
Good question. Is there anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah. Did you keep in touch with any friends you made in Vietnam after the war?
Oh, for a while, yeah, but since we're all from, there was nobody from Centerburg that, I could really deal with. But there were some of the officers that I was there, I kept in touch with, but not for very long. It kind of,
Life got in the way almost. I said life got in the way almost of that sort of stuff.
no, I'm not sure what you get at.
I said did just normal life kind of just make it so you guys weren't as close to keeping in contact with each other and
Just harder to keep up with communicating.
Right.
Was it difficult to communicate with friends and family there?
Oh yeah. What we did, I'm not a very good letter writer, so my wife and I, we had a little dictating cassettes.
Yep.
So I would send one to her, and then she would send back, and so we communicated that way.
I can imagine the time it takes to travel that far. There's a bit of there's a bit of delay, a huge delay between each thing you guys sent back and forth.
Oh yeah. I forget now. At the time, I knew if I sent a letter or sent one of those tapes, I knew how long it would take to get there, but I can't remember now what it was. But it was be several days before it arrived.
Anything else you guys need to add? Is that about everything? Alright, well.
That's everything I can think of.
I'd like to thank you for coming in here. That's
Absolutely.
That's been so good.
What?
He said thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. What's your actual assignment to do?
He wanted us to get a chance to interview a Vietnam veteran,
Okay.
and I was talking to my family about it, and they said you'd probably be a really good person to talk to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate it for giving us this time.
No problem, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alright, well,
You guys have a good day.